Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's nice to see everyone back after the extensive break, I think, between the summer and the Yom Tov and Yom Rime season. And obviously, I think for all of us, these are difficult and complicated times, each person in their own way. One of the difficulties of dealing actually with this topic and in general, any words of sort of chizuk around this time is that everyone's experiences are so different, and for some it's sort of a general anxiety about the situation. For others, it's sort of very personal and up close danger from the murderous events taking place. And I'm conscious as I speak about anti-Semitism also that addressing almost the very title anti-Semitism from a sort of perspective of Jewish philosophy is a little bit of a dangerous title, because one sort of philosophizing about something that in a sense shouldn't need any great depth of thought. It's discrimination, it's hatred, it's racism, it's negativity, it's intolerable a potential to unleash destructiveness. Is it really something that needs philosophizing about? And therefore, there's a number of challenges of speaking about it. It's speaking about anti-Semitism. It's a sensitive subject. It's personal. Each of us has had our own experiences, and some of us may have experienced anti-Semitism very up close, and it brings back personal and triggering experiences. And there's always a danger when speaking and trying to understand something that one can end up, in a sense, being perceived as justifying something which doesn't and shouldn't have any justification. So how does one sort of deal from a thought-based perspective with a topic where the very attempt to understand the phenomena is, in a sense, becoming complicit in it? And this is something I was sort of worrying about as I was preparing this. Understanding the hater, understanding the persecutor, or saying some of the hashkafas around these things can end up as a type of victim blaming almost, and therefore just getting that balance right is difficult. It's also difficult because it's wrong to exaggerate the phenomena, and at the moment now, for obvious reasons, we're all hurting terribly, and we're all anxious and worried. But I do think it's important to say that we also, we experience good times also, and in many ways, our collective Jewish experience at the moment has a lot of positives to it. It's the pain of realizing the amount of negativity there is out there, and the pain of obviously the expression that finds in Hamas's and other groups' murderous actions and intentions is beyond words. But equally, we should know that we, in some ways, we live in a golden age of Jewish experience, and thank God we have a population that, by and large, is positive to us, despite the shows of anti-Semitism that we've shockingly experienced here in the UK and elsewhere in the West. We have governments that are supportive, and getting that sort of balance of emotions right, of on the one hand being correctly, gravely concerned and needing to take action to address the rise of anti-Semitism, and on the other hand also appreciating that we're in an environment which has a lot of positives to it is a challenge. And again, this brings home the complexity of speaking about this, because there's different experiences. Because as we speak now, there are Jews, our brothers and sisters, in serious and severe danger. We have Chaylim in the army at the moment, and the captives. So it's almost obscene to sort of remind ourselves that, on the other hand, we don't face, thank God, an existential threat. The state of Israel is strong. Akash Baruch Hu looks after us. Hamas is not an existential threat to the state of Israel. And how do you balance that sort of message of a reminder that we're not facing an existential threat currently, and on the other hand, the personal danger that people face? So I do find this a difficult subject to speak about, and it's one where it's difficult to attempt to sort of step back and process philosophically from the comfort of Hendon when there's so many layers to it and so much going on. So please forgive me for this attempt to speak about it. I would say also, please interrupt me, meaning please feel free to ask and comment. I always say that, but particularly in this topic, where there's so much room for upset and offence, and I will take comments in a second, but where there's so much room for hurt and offence, and it's a scary subject. I don't know if I'm going to upload this recording or not. It's a difficult subject to address, so please forgive me in advance. I said I'll take questions. I will take questions. Other than to say, I haven't yet started the topic. So if at this point you're saying, well, you haven't defined anti-Semitism, we haven't said anything about it, all very true and acknowledged. So yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you said, that it wasn't an existential threat. That's something that in 1973,
Yeah.
when we were fighting.
Yes.
But I'm not sure that might be, I don't know what to use the word naive, Rabbi, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure that might be a misconception of how it might develop. We don't know how it developed because Bola 110,000, you know,
Yes.
5,000 rockets, they've got 100.
Yes.
With Iran, it might spread into existence.
As I said those words, I agree with you. It might spread into that, but at the moment now, thank God, we're not facing that, and that's the existential threat from Iran itself. And I don't mean we're not facing I'm not saying we're not facing in the bigger picture existential threats. I'm saying this particular scenario, we do need to remind ourselves it's not an existential threat. What can develop from it? 100%, absolutely, absolutely, 100%. Yes.
Well, just to expand.
Yeah.
I perceive the existence of Islam being presents with how they perceive Israel collectively recognizes an existential threat, because you only need to get quite a small percentage of that one. Realize that those sort of numbers quite happy to Israel.
So again, happy and gleeful is different to a current existential threat, and I do think we need to keep on reminding ourselves of this. That none of us know. Look, in a sense, part of the challenge of speaking about this is that the areas where I hope I have some insight to be able to offer from philosophy and Torah, and there's other areas in which I'm not claiming any rabbinic insight particularly. Charles was mentioning to me that he's doing a PhD currently on. Sorry, is this public knowledge or not? Maybe I'll just put back onto it. You didn't tell me it was confidential. Okay, I apologize. Yeah, you didn't tell me it's confidential. Maybe I should have said. But you know, there's areas in which there's no particular rabbinic insight, and I'm not claiming rabbinic insight, particularly over here. I do want to repeat again, though, that whilst I'm no prophet, it's hard to know the future. We do need to understand that, at least as far as I understand currently, the only existential threat to Israel at the moment is, in principle, is Iran. And at the moment now, Israel is not facing an existential threat from Hamas. How this can develop and where it can go, and long-term trends with the rise of anti-Semitism in all sorts of quarters, including in the Muslim world and so on, is very concerning. 100%. I'm not saying there's no clouds on the horizon. I'm saying at the moment now we do need to keep a sense of proportionality, and that's the point I'm simply making. Sorry, I mean.
I'm going to pick up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
The project
yes.
Of black men from the Middle East.
Yes.
To an Israeli 4 hours who had
yes.
retired from the military.
Yes.
In Israel and abroad. And he made a very, very abundant.
Yeah.
That he recognized by his existential threat to the state of Israel.
So
essential infrastructure, all of the desalination and the power plants in Limon, etc. Everything that is targeted by them. They know that, they expect that, and were those things to be struck, and in something like completely overwhelms the aerial defense system that Israel has.
So I want to just reiterate the point again. The Iran in potential is, and its puppets are absolutely in potential an existential threat to Israel, as opposed to Hamas. My point is simply that at the moment now, as the conflict currently stands, this is not an existential threat to Israel, and we need to remind ourselves of that and keep proportionality. The threat from Hezbollah and Iran, sadly, has not changed over the last month, Iran is a looming massive problem for Israel, absolutely no doubt. As Hamas currently stands, we're not facing, and I'm sorry if I spoke out unclearly. I simply mean in the current situation, the Hamas conflict is not, thank God, is not an existential threat to Israel. Iran is a terrible problem, and 100%. I didn't mean to lessen that at all. Sorry, someone had that. Yeah. Yes.
Immediately natural
Yes.
Israel.
Yes.
Every discussion about Israel.
Yes. Yes. So this is also an important point, and one of the things actually that we need to explore. So someone asked, please ask attendees and tools to speak loudly. I will do so, but I must say, at the end of the day, I can't offer via Zoom the same experience as being live here. We offer Zoom as an extra service, but please, if you want to fully participate, please do come. And attend live. In a sense, we've already flung ourselves more deeply into the topic than we were ready to do, because one of the complexities of anti-Semitism is understanding the equation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and even within that, whether every threat to Israel is primarily driven by that, and how you understand the nature of the conflict in the Middle East, and then the role of the Palestinian conflict within that, and so on. And in a sense, you're absolutely right. We've already jumped into. I chose this topic. Obviously, it was triggered by what's going on at the moment in Israel, which has made us all think again about anti-Semitism, and some of the sort of knock-on effects, obviously, of the conflict have been a terrible rise of anti-Semitism here in the UK and across the West. But you are right that the two are not synonymous. And again, I don't remember how I phrased my comments about existential attack, but again, I want to emphasize the rise of anti-Semitism in the UK is not currently an existential threat to us as Jews. That's 100% clear. Could it develop into that? It's worrying. Of course, it's worrying. It's worrying when you have senior political leaders, the former leader of the opposition, a potential prime minister speaking the way he does. These are all terrifying and worrying. But again, I think it behooves us nonetheless when we're talking about the subject to keep things in proportion. And it's very, very difficult when talking about it, because on a personal level, there are those, as we currently speak, in serious danger because of what's going on in Israel. But equally, on an existential level, as we currently are, as things are currently happening, this is not about, thank God, not about an existential threat. Though there are existential threats beneath the surface and looming and around, that of course they're there. And we've been talking a lot about Israel, but the same in anti-Semitism. If the rise of anti-Semitism in the West, or the significant population of potential anti-Semitism within some of the worrying trends within Islam continue, then there could develop existential threats, 100%. Okay, but let's take Neil's comments as a reminder that we should head back to what we're trying to look at. And this discussion is a timely reminder that almost anything one says around this is by definition, in a sense, superficial around things that are very complicated. I suppose just defining anti-Semitism is itself complicated, and it's complicated because I think the first reason it's complicated is because before we even come onto the word anti, I think the word Semitism is a difficult word, and I don't mean to get caught up in the semantics of the games that sometimes are played around this term, in which technically the concept of Semites is beyond the Jewish people, and there are other our cousins, the Arabs, are also B'nai Shem. They're also Semites. I don't mean that. Let's even understand it in the way the term was meant originally, as anti-Jewish. Part of the complexity of anti-Semitism is the complexity of defining what it means to be Jewish. Are we a race, a culture, a nation, a people, a religion, a family? These are difficult questions. These are existential questions. What it means to be a Jew. Part of the complexities of Israel and some of the internal conflicts that go on are around what it means to be a Jewish state and what it means to be Jewish. And none of the classic definitions quite fit the box. We are certainly a culture, we have cultural elements, but we are also widely differing cultures. We are certainly a religion, but there are many people with a very strong Jewish identity who don't feel particularly religious or may be quite distant from religion or completely disengaged from religion. we don't fit the normal definition of race. We have a wide variety of at least the labels and taglines that people classically give to race in terms of appearance and external look and style. We don't classically fit the pattern of a nation where we believe that as Jews, there's no contradiction to us being patriotic Brits and identifying very strongly with being part of America or France or Britain or whichever country is we are part of. So some of the challenges around anti-Semitism and defining it are because it's not clear what we mean by Semitism or what we mean by the concept of being Jewish exactly. And it's important to note, by the way, this is both a general problem, and even within Torah itself, even if we just look within Torah sources itself, the Torah itself defines us in many different ways. We are Bnei Yisrael, but we're also Am Yisrael. We're Bnei Yaakov. Halacha has in a sense, a clear answer as to who halachically is defined as Jewish, but and we discussed this when we were looking at Jewish identity in the past. But within that, clearly you have people who are halachically Jewish who are completely disengaged from any involvement with Jewish life. So part of the challenge over here is anti-Semitism, we'll talk about this more, morphs into so many different forms, and it's difficult to know which ones legitimately are anti-Semitic and which are just sort of disagreements around ideas and concepts. There's expressions of anti-Semitism that manifest on a religious level, anti-religion of Judaism, and you can just go online and see the sort of hate-filled sites full of pseudo quotes from the Talmud and that claims religious views and religious practices which are sort of virulently, anti-Gentile and claims around that. Then there's obviously claims against national Jewish identity, claims that we're somehow disloyal citizens, claims that Jews uniquely don't deserve a national state of their own. So again, part of the challenge around anti-Semitism is that it morphs into so many different forms. What I would say is that perhaps what's uniquely complicated around anti-Semitism is also the multiplicity of claims made against Jews through the generations, and many of them famously mutually contradictory. So the far right could claim that Jews are the source of communism and internationalism, and the left could claim that Jews are somehow uniquely capitalist and stirring up nation hate. Jews are hated for being different and appearing different, when anti-Semitism manifests as a hatred of the Orthodox or the ultra-Orthodox. On the other hand, there's this sort of stereotype of the sort of assimilationist Jew who somehow tries to hide their identity and mockery around, change of surnames and Jews who aren't keeping practices. And almost in one breath, these contradictory claims can be made. Are we rootless cosmopolitans, and it's sort of it changes, claims against Jews for being criminals, claims against Jews for being rich, claims against Jews being poor. You look at some of the anti-immigration, anti-Semitism that was in the UK and the USA in the 30s and even earlier, and claims of Jews, sort of being irreparably part of the criminal class, the non-productive class. So part of the problem in anti-Semitism, part of the reason I think to tie it down, is that we're trying to tie down something that isn't really a coherent ideology. It's not really an ideology. It's not a philosophy. So we're trying to deal with philosophical tools about something that doesn't behave like a philosophy at all.
And that is sort of a summing up of the situation, that there's some illogicality, but it's endemic and it goes back a very long way, such that it's almost part of Judaism. And if you disagree with that,
no, we will look in future weeks and maybe even touch on this week some of the quotes from Chazal and the Psukim around anti-Semitism, 100%. But actually, you are edging towards what often ends up as being the best attempt we can give around anti-Semitism, in the sense that we look at it on a functional level. In other words, even though it's hard to describe the sort of the theme or the message of anti-Semitism, but on a functional level, we can often identify it as a longevity associated with it. It has a persistence associated with it, and things like that. So we can try and talk about it from a sort of functional level, but it's quite hard to pin down, actually. So what is the anti-Semitic claim that we're trying to respond to, answer? And I'll come to the second then. And then that's part of the problem in dealing with it, because it's so complicated communally and personally to give the messaging, because it's like the Hydra, this whichever head you cut off, another head emerges of the snake, and it's almost impossible to find what's the correct messaging that we're meant to give. All Jews are capitalists. Well, there's also poor Jews, and there's working class Jews, and there's communist Jews, and well, that's exactly the problem. These communist Jews, and that's part of the challenge of it. That it's not something that can be tied down easily. There isn't really an ideology that we're fighting. If you're arguing with an ideology, you can deal with ideology, and in a sense, the two are linked. The longevity of anti-Semitism is because it mutates and morphs the whole time as is convenient, because clearly there's something deeper which is driving it, rather than an ontological drive or an existential drive, in which the existence of Jews is the problem, and therefore the manifestation of it, or the language that's used to express it, can vary in each society for whatever it is that represents somehow people's fear of something, rather than it needing to be a consistent and coherent ideology in terms of exactly what it's saying. Sorry, Leonard.
So it's strange that for 2,000 years we're accused from a Christological point of view of being killers.
Yes.
Of killing a certain gentleman, and then that seems to have completely gone away, shall we say, in the shadows, and it's then redefined more in other ways, because that was the main thing that we had to deal with.
So again, very interesting point. I mean, I will look in a little bit later at I don't want to over belabor the point, but we definitely need to look at Christian anti-Semitism and how it fed into many of these anti-Semitic narratives, and the accusation of deicide, of the murder of God, which again is like such a bizarre claim. It's so difficult to deal with, that somehow nationally responsible for the murder of God is just so weird. The claim wasn't even just the murder of a gentleman; it was and so we will look at some of those sources. Yeah, but I'm saying it's just an amazing claim, and the amount of blood spilled over something that's so hard to tie down, and yet your point brings out the point. We are again being accused of being bloodthirsty and murderous, and what's fascinating is, again, if you go back to Nietzsche and some of the Nazi claims, part of the claim was that Jews are over-moral, right? We've introduced morality to the world, which emasculates people, and sort of this image of wimpish Jews who aren't real men, who stand up and can fight, and the Übermensch, this sort of ability to dominate and be fierce, and then as Baruch Hashem, in a way, Jewish national experience has shifted, then suddenly the claim swings all the other way. And now we're overly immoral and overly bloodthirsty, and in many ways the Israeli army breaks so many of the anti-Semitic claims of hundreds of years, in which Jews are behaving so differently to how Jews were perceived as behaving. And yet again, anti-Semitism then rears its head, and now the problem is the tough Jew. So and that's part of the craziness of what makes this so difficult and challenging to talk about. And again, I want to emphasize, I personally find this topic incredibly painful, and I'm sure for many others it is also. So it's hard to talk about without tears coming to one's eyes. And that's part of why I feel so uncomfortable addressing this sort of philosophically. Yeah.
The problem is the existence.
Yeah.
It seems to me that the problem is not solved. It's just it's a solution. It's a solution for all the inadequacies, comfort, fail, there are convenient, sweet.
Yeah, I mean, there were articles posted, and I actually saved them. I think Charles actually posted one of them, and maybe someone else did, arguing, and I think there's a lot of truth to this, and in a way, this is one of the ideas that we're going to try and explore in more depth. That somehow, for some reason, Jews become the projection of deeper society insecurities and so on, and yeah, I think that's true. Though again, we need to understand this, what exactly that means. Yeah, I'll come to something new.
Especially the issue where people hovering around the others.
Yeah.
That is that how is it perpetuated? It seems to me perpetuated because parents tell their incredibly young children certain things. And if you then think about what sort of things you say to very, very young children, don't talk about necessarily explicitly just about Jews, but you talk to them presumably about what is very important to you, whether it's based religion or based values, very, very simplistic terms. So in other words, I suspect one of the problems here is that you're perpetuating anti-Semitism because children at an incredibly early age are, in a sense, brainwashed into perceiving certain things in certain ways. Then, of course, as they grow up, they can garnish it or paint new elements to it, their own experiences of media and other things. But it all starts where they originally accepted a certain idea because that's what they've been taught when they're very young.
Okay, so this is an important point, and let's try and just bring a little bit of let's try and tidy up a little bit all the comments we're making, because these are all important comments. One area where in a sense, philosophical thinking is helpful is to try and cut up the different parts of the problem. And there's a number of layers of problem to this. One is defining what exactly we mean by anti-Semitism, which is no easy task. And in a moment, I'll try and do a little bit more of a definition. It's going to be a sort of functional definition rather than a depth definition of sort of what are the clues that manifest ourselves? How do we identify a comment as anti-Semitic as opposed to just ignorance or something like that? Then there's the more profound question. Okay, what is it what's really underlying all these disparate claims against Jews and sources of hatred? Andrew's put forward a canter which has a lot of truth to it, but maybe still lacks. Okay, but why the Jews? There's somehow the projecting on Jews of other problems. And then there's the question of, okay, how does it propagate? Because if we can understand how it propagates, then maybe we can deal with. The analogy here used is I don't remember whose analogy this is, and I don't remember where it first came from. I did try and research it, and I don't have major research tools for it. This is an analogy of it as being a virus of sorts. It's helpful to think of it as a virus that somehow propagates itself and mutates against different forms of attack. It's a very old analogy it seems to me from what I could see that within a few years of understanding of how bacteria and viruses spread, people were already comparing anti-Semitism to that. I don't remember who first put forward this analogy, but I just want to point out that it's two separate discussions. That there's, if you like, what are the symptoms of the virus? Then there's what's the virus itself. Then there's how does the virus mutate? And then how does it spread? And each one is its own topic. Because if we can work out that the virus mutates through sneezing, then we can deal with it differently than if it mutates through if it's not an airborne virus, but a touch virus, or one that exists in the food that we eat. So you're putting forward a suggestion about how the virus propagates, rather than what the virus is. And I think certainly part of the propagation is in education of small children, but there's many other things. I mean, it may be through propagation in the media and culture, and there's a range of a vast array of influences that molds people into what they are. And probably all these influences come to bear on anti-Semitism. So the home is an influence, but the media is also an influence, and school is an influence, and faith leaders and religious centers are influences, and left-wing ideology can be an influence, and right-wing ideology can be an influence, and so on and so forth. There was an interesting little, very brief skirmish of tension on our WhatsApp group, in which there was a discussion about, is anti-Semitism associated with liberal left lovies, or is it associated with the far right? And then the discussion calmed down, and that's legitimate again, because this is part of the problem that it exists in both political camps. And again, this is part of the challenge of dealing with it. The other point you raise, which is also an equally fundamental point, and I think this is true about anti-Semitism, but equally true about all racism and all stereotypes, is that we sort of feed in, once you have the germ of an idea, you then feed in evidence into it, and you notice, I'll come to a moment, you notice the evidence that fits it, and not that those that don't. So if you have an image that a certain race is particularly crime prone, you'll remember all the news articles that speak about crime from them. You won't notice or remember as well all the positives, and you won't notice or remember as well all the other crime that's done by other people. And we sort of find evidence, but in a sense, again, that's a second order thing. Once you decide on your idea, once one decides on an anti-Semitic ideology, or not even deciding it as an ideology, we're talking about it again in a very philosophical sense. Once someone has various stereotypes, then they'll begin spotting all the clues that fit. So if they're at the traffic lights and they're cut up by a Jew, it'll be, there goes a Jew. They cut up by anyone else, it won't be noticed. The Jew lets them go, it'll be an exception. So this is like a general problem with worldviews and even legitimate worldviews, perhaps, and certainly warped worldviews. Sorry, Gov.
Okay, it's not functionality.
Yeah.
The whole understanding of it's ideologies that we teach you throughout the ages. Irrelevant. As a topic of Jewish philosophy, the only subject of interest is the Jewish people as being set aside from suffering. And the Torah doesn't really care about the ideology of groups that decide the person. Literally, the fact that we are always a target of persecution in that sense. And it's either relationship between us and Hashem, or just our existence as a separate people in the world in that sense. You don't need to go into the looks of Muslims or Christians and left and right.
Okay, so I want to make 3 points. The first is that maybe you're right, meaning in a sense that's part of what I'm coming to say, though not all I'm coming to say, is that when you see an ideology that manifests in so many different ways, maybe we need to go deeper. And if it's like all, I don't mean to claim this as a sort of scientific discussion. It's not. It's philosophy. But whenever you see something manifesting in multiple ways, it's always nice to know is there a unified theory behind it. So, and part of the beauty of science is when you have multiple phenomena, the rotation of the planets and tides and apples falling off trees, and you can work out there's one general law of gravity behind it all. That's part of the beauty of a nice scientific theory, that it finds something unified. So it would be nice if we could emerge with some form of unified understanding of these multiple facets and understanding. And you're correct that maybe therefore, in a sense, all the different ideologies are missing the point. And in a sense, we're trying to work through this because we're trying to understand this. The second point is you're putting forward a candidate of an explanation of where this comes from. And you're saying this is because the Torah Hashkafot somehow was singled out for suffering. We will definitely explore that concept, but I just want to say now, without exploring it in depth, it's both a true concept in the sense that there's multiple Jewish sources that speak about this, and also a very troubling one, because what does that mean then to be a Jew, and does this then end up in victim blaming, and how do we deal with that? So it's an important piece of Torah that we need to look at, but it's a challenging piece of Torah. Okay, so
presumably there's as why Kodesh Baruch Hu introduced anti-Semitism into the world and they ignored it.
So, okay, let me just repeat that question, because all the comments deserve repeating. But yeah, presumably we're going to discuss why Kodesh Baruch Hu introduced anti-Semitism into the world. So there's 2 points to make. The first is in all Jewish philosophy, and we've discussed this explicitly when we spoke about predetermination and free will and the like. There's always the challenge of, okay, to what degree is this HaKadosh Baruch Hu introducing things into the world, and to what degree is this human behavior? And Gav's important comments about, well, surely we have Chazals and Torah sources that tell us that anti-Semitism is driven by part of the hashgacha, the unique divine mission or role of Jews somehow, is okay, that's true. No doubt there are Torah sources around that, but how does that balance with human choice and human free will? By the way, I mean, arguably, I don't see, in a little bit time, I will try and explain why I think anti-Semitism is a relatively modern word. But if we can view Paro as an anti-Semite, and I'm not sure we can, because there may have been other things going on in Egypt, then in a sense, this question is already there asked about Egypt. And I think we looked at this source when we spoke about free will and predetermination. The classic source of this problem is in the Brisbane Abasorim, because it brings out all the problems. You have a covenant between Hashem and Avraham Avinu, in which HaKadosh Baruch Hu says explicitly, we have a covenantal relationship that's going to cause you suffering. So we have problem number 1. What does it mean to have a covenantal relationship with Hashem that will cause us suffering? That's terrible. And then we have the second problem, which is V'gama Sagoya Donanochi. V'gama Sagoya yeah. And the nation which persecutes them, I'm going to judge. And there, everyone speaks, most famously the Rambam, but everyone else, the Ramban and everyone else, which is 1 minute, if this is somehow predetermined and part of a covenantal relationship with Hashem, then why on earth should Paro and Mitzrayim be punished for this? And that's where you get the tension between free will and HaKadosh Baruch Hu and how the two interact. So your comment in combination with God's comments are very important. On the one hand, somehow, everything that happens in the world is somehow godly and a manifestation of Hashem's plan for history and for the world. And on the other hand, this is human-driven. And this also sort of neatly brings us up, actually. Can we use the expression of anti-Semitism even about events in Tanakh? To what degree is Mitzrayim an anti-Semitic story, or is it something else? Yeah.
The Jews have been the most visible and conspicuous part.
Yes.
Which project all.
Yes.
So wherever we are, whatever's going on in the world, there's a problem. We're the scapegoat.
Yes. Yeah. I will visit probably next week. In fact, definitely next week now. Some of Rabbi Sachs's thoughts on this. because I think they're very powerful actually and very, very interesting. And I know they're well known, but I still think they're worth revisiting. And 100%, yeah. No, no, no. On the contrary, this is. Yeah.
We often say in any persecutor victim relationship, there are two parties.
Yes.
We're very good at looking at the other party. We say in a relationship, there are constants there. And there's this person that my wife said about some of the people promulgated with from a young age with children.
Yeah.
I actually think we can talk about us with the midrash that really sticks in my head. I'd like to be there to understand. But when Scottish Bible, there's probably a class in the nations on earth, and so we can't because I'll be murdered or you don't stealing.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that we teach children about
the
arguments so early on. That probably on a very simple level, it seems to be expanded.
Okay. So the truth is, as you were speaking, I went through the same thought. I wasn't sure whether you were going to be talking about us or not. I'll say the following, and this is in a way perhaps the most sensitive thing that I can say. On some other occasion, I would love to do a honest discussion about our own world and some of the attitudes we project and how our own education works. And actually, in a sense, an honest look at Jewish flaws, in a sense. Very sensitive, probably not recorded, but an important, honest conversation about our own society. I definitely do not want to discuss it now. And the reason I don't want to discuss it now is because there is nothing in like any people and like any faith and like any group of individuals, we have a massive number of flaws, 100%, and we're so far from perfect. I mentioned this little analogy of when you're cut up at the traffic lights and then you might say, there goes another Jew. Okay, but there is a question, why did you cut someone up at the traffic lights? As do many of us when we drive selfishly, whatever it is. One can talk about all that and engage in honest self-reflection and self-criticism around that, but none of that even remotely justifies anti-Semitism. And therefore, I'm going to be very careful around that because I don't want to go into the path of many anti-Semites do hop onto something, they grab onto something and exaggerate it and blow it out of proportion. It has some little elements of trace elements of truth to it. We're not perfect people. You can find our rogues, plenty of them, and some of them fill some of the anti-Semitic stereotypes. The question around racism, not just anti-Semitism, but all racism, is the ability to pick on the behavior of one individual, or even several or many individuals, and somehow project out of that an extrapolation about how all Jews behave. Are there dishonest bankers who are Jews, right? 100%. Are there Jews who are money grabbers and money lovers? 100%. Does that even remotely translate into somehow there's a national trends of that sort of behavior, or racial trends, or religious trends? I think we're an extraordinarily generous bunch as a whole. So I would love to do a series on and I often do try and speak from the pulpit about turning things inwards and looking at, okay, how can we, this is the situation externally, but how can we improve internally? One of the reasons I do it from the pulpit is because I think that's an important message. It's very easy to turn against others. We need to look at ourselves. Second, because it's Shabbos and not being recorded, but 100%. But I don't think this is the place to do it because I think that turning inwards in that way is somehow seen as legitimizing or justifying anti-Semitism, and it doesn't. And the same, by the way, what I would say is, if we're having this topic, the one comment I would say is, as much as this is a topic about anti-Semitism, we do need to turn this a little bit around stereotypes that because this is not a uniquely Jewish phenomenon, all of us as humans, areas in which we do this to other people, and that I do feel comfortable saying, which is we all have some degree of similar pattern of behavior in which we look at some group of others and we sort of extrapolate from the behavior of a minority onto the behavior of a generality, and that's certainly, in that sense, we shouldn't be self-centered around anti-Semitism. We should recognize there's aspects of it which certainly affect others also, though there is something unique sadly about the Jewish experience of that sort of discrimination or stereotyping and intolerance and so on that exists. Yeah.
Like Judaism, we were chosen.
Yes.
Is that true of it? I'm just trying to think like if there's anti-Semitism. Is it in the way that there might be Islamophobia? Do they have that belief that they were chosen?
Okay, so I'm no expert on my own faith, never mind any other faiths. So I'm not going to answer that question. As far as I know, no, there isn't. And chosenness has certainly featured in many of the anti-Semitic claims. Like there's this Jewish arrogance, and that's chosenness.
favourite shot.
Right, yes, everyone's good. There you, yeah. Yeah, yeah. And we will see a chazal around this, in which a chazal talk about Yad Sinah La'olam, at the time of Matan Torah, at the time of Sinai, Yad Sinah La'olam. And someone posted here on the group, confirmation bias, which is probably the word I should have used when we were speaking about your point about as soon as a germ of a prejudice creeps in, then you have confirmation bias, in which you notice all the evidence that's mounting this. We will speak a little bit about chosenness and anti-Semitism, that we will touch on 100%, because Chazal bring it up. Yeah.
I'm going to speak about Moshe's idea of Dora Flogger, how it, if he says that Dora Flogger, they all tried to fight HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they weren't killed, they were dispersed all over the world. And his thesis is that is why someone who's never met a Jew before, they've got, because for what we stand, and he says that they get up in the Dora Flogger, this is what they wanted to do then, and it never got changed, never got punished for it, they were just dispersed. And he said that's why.
So I wasn't planning to speak about it now. I gave a share on Parshas Noach many years ago when we looked at the Dora Flogger in detail, and I touched on this thesis. I hadn't thought of mentioning it now. Maybe I could have, I should have, I don't know. So, but I wasn't planning to discuss it. Maybe next week I'll go, or another week I'll go into more detail. I want to finish just with one concluding remark. And then next week, maybe we'll try and go further. It's still going to be a bit of time gap till I get to Torah sources, I'm afraid. So it is fair to say that this is meant to be Jewish philosophy discussion, but we're going to start off with general. There is a book out that came out recently, which I did mention actually from the pulpit. I can't remember why or when, which I found very, very, very interesting. Not because I agreed with everything in the book at all, but I found it personally very stimulating. And I just want to draw out one feature in the book. But first of all, before I go further, the book is a book called The Jewish State, From Opposition to Opportunity. And it's written by Rav Doron Perez, who is the head of Mizrahi. Since I'm mentioning him, I'll mention also that obviously Anti-Semitism thoughts are with him. He's been through the last week the very, very difficult experience of one son who was missing, a second son who was very badly injured, and the second son also got married this week. So the range of that little nugget of his experience this week brings out the complexity of what's going on in Eretz Israel, in which he walked under the chuppah, walked a son who had been shot under the chuppah, at the same time as knowing another son is missing. I mean, it's just, I can't imagine. Just sending so many tefillas and love to Rav Doron. But he wrote a very, very interesting book, From Opposition to Opportunity. The reason I found the book very stimulating is because it's one of the first books that I've seen written for quite a while that makes a serious attempt at understanding anti-Semitism hashkafically, and from very Torah sources. And I highly recommend actually everyone to read the book. I think it's a very, very interesting book. It's also an attempt at arguing a path to Achdus, in what could Jewish unity look like in the divisions that are racking the state. Some people hate the book, some people love the book, but it deserves reading because it's a very, very interesting book. What he says, which he makes a machshava point, a sort of a source-based hashkafic point. But I'm about to ruin the punchline of the book, by the way. So what's it called when you give a warning to someone that you're about to? A spoiler alert, yeah. But because I'm going to summarize in one sentence everything he says, really, or the whole first half of the book. But I'm quoting him because it's quite a helpful, neat summary as we reach our concluding minutes in the area of the range of anti-Semitism, and he gives it then a hashkafic twist. But based on the thinking of the Vilna Gaon, he argues, and I think this is quite a nice summary. He argues that basically there's three forms of anti-Semitism. He says there's one form of anti-Semitism that we find is all anti-Semitism is he argues is driven by destruction. In other words, you don't have a right to exist. But the question is, what doesn't have a right to exist, and what way don't you have a right to exist? One form of anti-Semitism is spiritual erosion and hatred of the Torah. In other words, we're going to try and wipe out your Torah values, your Torah life. The second form of anti-Semitism is physical destruction. We're going to try and destroy you physically. And the third form of anti-Semitism is national destruction or sovereignty over Israel destruction. You don't have a right to exist as a nation. You're a nation state ruling over Israel. And I found that helpful because it sort of it seems a good collective categorization of all the subforms of 6 months ago.
Yeah,
it was 6 months ago. Okay, I'll come to you in a moment about that. He quotes that he's basing it on the Vilna Gaon, actually. So this is explicit in the writing of the Vilna Gaon, these three categories. So whoever the someone else is, maybe, I don't know, the Vilna Gaon is there, it exists, written in the 18th century. And the Vilna Gaon ties it into the three parents of anti-Semitism we find in Tanakh. And the Vilna Gaon explicitly says that this is going to go through the generations, it's going to morph from one to the other. He says Moav is the Torah role model of spiritual anti-Semitism, Moav with the whole plan of sort of corrupting Jewish morality and everything else. Edom, as most primarily manifested by Amalek and then onto Haman and so on, is a manifestation of physical destruction, right? Haman, Edom, the destruction produced physically. And finally, the Plishtim, very interesting, because we often don't talk about Plishtim in Machshava, but hundreds of years of Jewish history were an encounter with the Plishtim. Klal Yisrael enter Eretz Yisrael. In the book of Yehoshua, they quite successfully conquer large chunks of Eretz Yisrael, and then Shoftim and Shmuel, till finally David HaMelech rids them of it, is really confrontation with Plishtim. And we never really speak about that era of Jewish history. But there's hundreds of years between the first very successful conquest of Eretz Yisrael and then the mopping up of everyone else, which is the era of the Plishtim, which is a challenge to Jewish sovereignty and nationhood. And when you read Shoftim, the Vilna Gaon points out again and again, whenever there's a chance of Jewish reunification, the Plishti version of anti-Semitism which wants to stop Jews coalescing into a nation and having their own land. And as they're okay with scattered Jewish tribes, I don't want to go too much into Sefer Yeshua and Shoftim and even Shmuel into too much depth. But one of the things you see in Yeshua, Shoftim, Shmuel is that what we take for granted of national identity doesn't immediately coalesce into a very strong sense of Klal Yisrael. There's sort of factions and Shavotim which are not working together as naturally as we would think. It's a chiddush in Shoftim and Shmuel when tribes come to each other's aid. There's almost a tribalism around, and Plishtim attack whenever these tribes are coming together to form a coherent, proper, strong national working together on sovereignty. So he argues based on the Vilna Gaon, and it's Mefurish in the Vilna Gaon anyway. The beauty of what he says is that he noticed this Vilna Gaon and brings it out and expresses it. But he says these are the three parents, the three avot of anti-Semitism. That's a nice, neat summary. And behind that, he puts machshava of linking it to three biblical episodes, which I take it or leave it, read the book and form your own judgment. But I just thought that was like a nice summary of the sort of manifestations, if you like, of anti-Semitism through the generations. Next week, we'll look at this in a little bit more detail, but I think that's a useful summary. Charles, you want to say that some more recent author has written similar ideas or not? No. I'll find you something afterwards. Okay, I'll be interested. Thank you. Okay, so we'll stop there for today. And if I've upset you or anyone, please let me know. My intention was not to do so. And Mitzvah Hashem will reconvene next Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.